Welcome to the Working Mumma Podcast. How's your day going, Mama? My name's Karina O'Brien, and today we're diving into a topic that so many mums face: returning to work after maternity leave or making a career transition. My guest today is Ash Battye, founder of The Career Pursuit and seasoned hiring and HR expert. With over a decade of experience in recruitment and HR across government and private sectors, Ash is passionate about helping businesses find the right talent and supporting job seekers, especially mums, in getting their resumes noticed and landing the right roles. If you've ever felt stuck in job search, unsure how to position your skills after a career break, or intimidated by the interview process, this episode is for you. Let's get started. Welcome to the Working Mumma Podcast, a show that provides real-world tips, tricks, and advice to all working mamas on how they can have a career, family, and hopefully one day break the glass ceiling. Welcome, Ash. Welcome to the Working Mumma Podcast. How's your day going so far?
Good, thanks. Thanks for having me on.
My pleasure. So, Ash, how would you best describe yourself and what's been your career journey so far?
So currently I'm calling myself a hiring and HR partner. I do have my own business, so I get to call myself whatever I like. So that's what I'm going with at the moment. Basically, my focus is on working with businesses to hire and manage their teams, but focusing on aligned fit cultural values, really driving the people side of the process. I do also write resumes on the side still. I actually started my business as a resume writer with focusing on helping those in a few areas that seem to really need it. So like high school students just starting out, mums returning to the workforce, those that might have been made redundant late in life, that sort of thing. Those ones that are sort of at risk or not sure how to get back into the workforce or take the first step, that sort of thing. I do have 10 years experience, 10-something years experience in hiring and HR. So I have sat heavily on the recruitment side of things, and that's in a variety of industries, private, public, local government, all sorts of industries. And the reason I started my business was because it was really frustrating to be on that recruitment side and not be able to progress with candidates because they didn't know how to write a resume. And so we couldn't progress with them because they didn't give us the information we needed without us having to spend a lot of time getting that information from them, which is not practical. So I really wanted to be able to help the little guy, so to speak. And so I started my business as a resume writer for that reason.
So obviously you just said about doing a lot of work, obviously on the little person that may not be able to get the start of others. And you said that around return to work for working mums. What do you find are some of those common challenges that mothers face when returning back into the workforce after maternity leave, or if they've also had an extended period away of, longer than 12 months?
So the biggest thing they face is getting their resume past that first stage of the process because they've got a big gap in their resume. So my number one piece of advice is to address the gap. Don't leave it blank because then they don't know if you had a career break for family or you were in jail. One extreme to the other. So it's really important to address those gaps about why you were out. And it doesn't have to be a lot, literally just a career break - family reasons or something like that with the dates on it, just to acknowledge that, yes, you were on a break at that time. And then they can see that you're not actually missing things from your resume, because that's one of the things as a recruiter we struggle with when it's got so many gaps in it with no explanation why. Well, why were they out of work for 6 months here, for 12 months here? What was going on there? And it raises a lot more questions than it answers. Gaps are totally normal. It's just important to address them, basically. And I would say that would be the number one challenge that people face, is that they're scared about having those gaps. So the quick fix is just to address it, basically.
So obviously getting through the front door and resumes, are there some other things that you see with women returning back into the workforce after maternity leave? It's obviously, I guess, resumes if they're changing jobs. Is there something else as well that you've noticed?
Well, one thing that I think women in particular, we don't really give ourselves enough credit. So as a mother, there's so much that we do that can go on a resume. Like if you've been out of the workforce for years, it is likely that you have been part of playgroups, NF committees, things like that, that you can say that you were a part of. And that all contributes. You've gained experience and skills from that. And you can include that in your resume as well. And often what I found is that this stuff wasn't coming out until the interview. So they were talking about this experience that they gained, but they hadn't thought to put it in their resume. And we'd just given them an interview just to find out more. But it would have been a more of a sure thing if that had been in their resume from the start. So it's thinking about all the things that you have gained during that time that you can put into practice in a role.
Yeah. So it's really just, it's probably also valuing the work of motherhood and also of what you're doing, if you're volunteering, which, say playgroups, kinders, helping out with family and friends, logistics and things like that. So it's also probably valuing and recognizing the work that you're doing whilst you are having, a career break, really.
Absolutely. And to be fair, it is really hard to recognize that for ourselves when it's still not heavily recognized in society that these are things. It's just, you're a mum, cool. Not so much, you're a mum, that's amazing, look at how much you have to deal with. It's still, not really celebrated enough. All the things that we do have to do as a mother and all the things we have to balance and all the skills that we gain from it. I know before I was a mother, I thought I was good with time management. I had no idea until I had kids. I used to say it, but honestly, no idea whatsoever what was required to be good at time management until I had kids.
Yeah, 100%. That's for sure. And so what about as well if you're wanting to do a career change, like when you're re-entering back into the workforce and you're trying to apply for roles? So I often hear of women that are like, right, I was on X career trajectory. I may want to take a shift that may be in a more family-friendly, more flexible work environment. Or sadly, some environments and some organizations still not on the page of actually supporting flexible work, even after the years of COVID. So how can women then just navigate some of these pivots, but also the inflexibility of some organizations to also recognize that, yep, this is for them as well?
Well, unfortunately, with inflexible organizations, it is a bit out of our control. It's very frustrating. But if that's something they're looking for and they're looking to, change trajectory, it's just highlighting the skills that they have gained over the years, both as a parent and in previous workplaces. So really looking at the skills that an advert is highlighting, that the experience they're highlighting, the skills, the attributes, and putting that everywhere through the application. So really making it seem like a no-brainer that this is the person for the role because they match it according to the skills they've asked for in the advert. It's the same for anyone who's making a career change, basically, or anyone applying for any role. It's really making sure that you are showing that you match the advert to a T, or highlighting where you might not match it, but this is what you're willing to do to match it, or these are the steps you're already taking. Like, for example, lots of mothers come back from work and then they do some further study if they're looking to change. Not that it's a requirement, but lots do it. There's a lot of free TAFE courses and things, or discounted TAFE courses. So applying for a job in a different industry, I don't have these skills, but I'm undertaking this certificate at the moment, that sort of thing. So just highlighting the gaps and saying what you're doing about it or what you're willing to do about it.
Yeah, it's I guess not shying away from it either and just owning it. So because I know a lot of people struggle with the resume. So obviously putting the keywords through it. What happens if you then get to the next round miraculously? Because I know a lot of people go, I've put in so many job applications and things. So obviously getting the keywords and shaping and also I guess not doing vanilla resumes either. It's also tailoring it to not just doing the spitball approach.
Right. 100%, yes.
What are some of those critical elements of a good resume? Because I know that the way that resumes are created these days is very different to, 5-10 years ago. So what are the characteristics and I guess also formatting styles of a good resume?
Yeah, absolutely. Like at the moment, we're seeing a lot of Canva resumes, things created in like a design program. They're not the greatest. They look pretty, but they're not the greatest. My advice is still always to create it in Word or a Google Doc or something where you can really focus on consistent formatting. It's not necessarily about being pretty. It's about being consistent. So column resumes, there's always different views on this. I'm only really a fan of a column resume if you're a school leaver where everything fits onto one page, basically. Otherwise, your consistent full page across, making use of all the space you have available and trying to stick to 2 to 3 pages. It's not a hard and fast rule. You've heard things about resume should never be over 1 page, resume should never be over 2 pages. There really is no hard and fast rule. A resume is as long as it needs to be, but keeping the information short and to the point. So at the top, you'd have your name in big letters. You want that to stand out so that if they print it off and they've got a stack of resumes on the desk, yours stands out because your name is up there basically, and your contact details right underneath your name. Even recently, I have had to go back into Seek and try and find where someone's contact details were because they weren't on the resume, or they were all the way at the bottom of the resume and I thought they were a references details. So making sure that's really clear. From there, you want a summary of what you can bring to the role specific to the role that you're applying for. This is really important for return to work mums, transitioning careers, things like that, because it highlights the skills that you have in relation to that role, even if the rest of your resume is not an exact fit. And it should have a sentence in there about why you're applying for that role so that they know, well, this person doesn't have the same experience as what this role is. Did they even mean to apply for this? It's just being really clear on that basically. And then listing your roles out in reverse chronological order. So most recent first, making sure the dates say the month and the year, not just the year. There's a really big difference between December 2023 to December 2024 or, January. I'm getting confused now, but December to January, January to December, it could be the space of 2 months or 2 years, basically. So being really clear on the months that you started and keeping the points under each role really relevant. So this is where the advert comes in really handy to cater your resume to what the role is asking for. You might have amazing experience, but there's no point talking about it if it's not relevant to the role. You want to really focus on the things that are relevant to that role. So each resume should be catered to each specific advert that you're applying for, which does mean it's quite a lot of work applying for jobs.
Yeah. And then do you include references?
Entirely up to you. I tend not to, simply because once you give the referee's details, you're giving your implicit consent for them to be contacted. But what you want to do is be able to go to your references to say, I've interviewed for this role. This is the advert or the position description. This is what the role is and the things I want you to really highlight about me, not just a reference getting a random call and then not even realizing that they were listed or that they were going to be contacted. So that's sort of my approach on it.
And how far back do you go with jobs? So do you go back to your first job out of uni, or do you just give a one-liner of, look, this is the job I did? How far, and I guess how much detail do you go back?
So there is no real hard and fast rule on this, particularly for return to work mothers who might have had 5 years out. The general rule is information for about 10 years. But if you've had 5 years out, that's only 5 years of work. And that might only be one or two roles, but actually you had 3 more before that were more relevant to what you're applying for. So there's no hard and fast rule. It is a bit of a common sense rule. If your old roles aren't relevant, then don't worry about including them. Basically, you want to keep to around 10 points per role and not too much more than that, with your most recent role having the most amount of detail, or your most recent or your most relevant to what you're applying for now, and sort of working backwards from there. So your first role might only have 5 points, whereas your most recent one would have 10, or there might be one in the middle that was most relevant to what you're applying for. So that one would be really chunky as well.
No problems. And there's so much of, I know the classic, females, they feel like they've got to have 80% of the job criteria, whereas males, pretty much have 20% and then they'll still go for it. What happens if like people that are listening are going, look, I'd love to do these roles. I keep applying for them, but because I don't feel all of the criteria, I don't feel like I'm actually getting to the next stage.
It is hard because, again, like I said before, as women, we don't give ourselves enough credit. So it's hard for someone else to give us credit when we don't give ourselves enough credit. It's easy to say just apply for it anyway, but it is time consuming. So, of course, if it is a role you're really interested in, take the time to apply for it, even if it is only 50% that you meet. And then what you're doing is focusing on highlighting those skills that are relevant to the role, focusing on closing any gaps. So the things that you feel you don't meet, you're calling that out and saying, I don't have experience in this technology, but I do have experience in this instead, or I don't have this qualification, but I'm actually working towards it. So just calling out the gap and saying what you're doing about it or what you're willing to do about it, and highlighting the skills and the personal attributes that make up you as a person that might get you through the line anyway.
Yeah. And do you use cover letters these days, or is it good to use a cover letter?
Look, I had this debate with my partner when he was applying for roles, and I was getting so angry at him because he was not using a cover letter sometimes. And then he got a job without a cover letter. So, I say you need a cover letter. If there's not a space for a cover letter, obviously don't worry about it. But anywhere that there is a space for one, provide one. Even if it's just a Seek application, take the time to write one up in Word, matching your formatting of your resume, and attach that as well. That cover letter is highlighting the key skills and experience that you have, as well as closing any gaps or saying any extra things that you need to cover about why you might be applying for this role if you are doing a career change. Cover letters are, again, particularly important for return to work mothers and career changes and things like that, where it might not be clear to the person reading the resume why this person is applying for the role. So the cover letter is just giving more context to that.
Yeah. And what about also making sure that it matches up with your LinkedIn profile? Or is it also, how critical do you think as well it is actually having an up-to-date, and consistent profile as well on LinkedIn? Because I know a lot of people also do some, I guess, LinkedIn stalking to validate also resumes as well.
They do, yes. I think it entirely depends on who you're applying for as to how much searching they do. So it's definitely not going to hurt. I mean, if you're applying for a role as a mechanic or something like that, chances are they're not going to look on LinkedIn. If you're applying for an office-based role, you should have a LinkedIn profile and have your work experience up to date that matches your resume. In terms of matching the points or the role descriptions, things like that, that can change. So what you have on LinkedIn might not match the resume exactly, but the position titles, companies, dates need to be the same. Otherwise, it's going to raise more questions. But the resume is like a sales brochure, basically, of yourself. So you're needing to highlight the key parts of yourself for that role. Whereas LinkedIn is like your website of where just everything is, and that's okay.
Yeah. So it's always good to, I guess, have both, particularly if you're in a professional role. So what are some of those signs as well that what you've talked about doing career transitions, but what are the signs that you may go, oh, look, I actually do want to transition back? Because I know that some women will go back to work and go, look, I'm really excited. I'm really glad. And I feel fortunate that I'm actually got a job, that I haven't been made redundant, which sadly, there are many women that unfortunately get made redundant. So if that was you, definitely take note of all the tips for getting for the resume. But what if you go back and you're like, look, this isn't really making me happy. I want to do that career transition. What are some steps to help people go through that? Because it is probably also a bit of a mental transition as well as then the physical of actually going through the jobs. And again, it goes back to, I guess, that confidence piece is what you talked about earlier. But making those transitions and going, oh my goodness, I'm a mum and my values and my direction has actually changed a little bit, which is something that I regularly hear about. How can we navigate that? I guess also making sure that it's a positive experience and something that we can also make sure that we still have got I guess, a rewarding career at the end of the day.
Mm. Yeah. So I was actually talking about a little bit about this with some industry co-workers not long ago. And it's that feeling of the Sunday dread.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So if it gets to Sunday, you're either going to be like, yep, back to work, back into routine. Here's everything I'm going to get ready. Cool. Yep, we're on track. Or it's going to be Sunday all day is just full of dread. And I know a lot of mothers returning to work in general will have this, especially if it's a first child as well, and they're having to return earlier than planned. Or earlier than they'd like. It's that dread of, I'm not ready. I don't want to go back to this role. This isn't what I want to be doing anymore. And that Sunday dread, it might be several months long. So you're right. It's a total mindset thing, and acknowledging when that feeling is there. It's really important to pay attention to that. Again, especially as a mother, if you're not your best at work or because of work, you can't be your best as a parent. And it can be really hard to say, I'm going to look for something else, especially if it, a permanent role, or it has the hours that would let you be there for your child when you wanted to be, all these things. It's really hard to go, it's still not quite what I want. You're allowed to be your own individual person as well as a parent, and find ways to make that work. In terms of sort of how to get started from there, it, again, depending on your feelings about it, it can be really hard to get started. So for me, I'm all about taking the first step, just that first step, which I would say would be just seeing what's out there. If you know exactly the sort of role that you're looking for or that you're wanting to go to, you can search and see what's out there for that. If there's any gaps, consistently that you don't have, then you can look at, well, should I fill this gap, or is there someone in the industry I can talk to about whether these gaps are really important, or I could still get a role without it? Or if you're not sure at all what you want to do, just spending time scrolling on Seek and seeing what's out there and just getting a feel for what is out there, what the hours are, what the roles are, what the salaries are, all that sort of thing, and just see what feels right, what sort of things go, yeah, that sounds good. I want to do that. Just that first step of putting feelers out, basically. And then it's the next step after that, and the next step after that.
Just giving it a go. But I think also, don't be afraid of leaning into those feelings, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. You've got to be your best self.
Yeah. I think it's so many times, as they say, mums are the heartbeat of the family.
Mm-hmm.
So the more that if you feel happy, that will then transcend into your kids, your family around you, and things like that. So if you're happy, it'll really help and have a positive influence on others.
That's right.
So okay, so we've got people that have, say, returned back into work, had career transitions, or actually returning back in for a period of time and looking for that next role. Okay, so they've gone through the resume, they've had that first round. Yep, you're through to the next phase. How can you then prepare for an interview? And how do you then, I guess, show up as your best self to really, I guess it is selling yourself.
It is.
And interviews can be really intimidating, particularly if you haven't gone for one for a while. So I hadn't gone for one for a very long time. Even though it was an internal role, it was still very intimidating. And it was very, I was preparing for it as though it was an external one. But how can you prepare for an interview so you can show up as your best true self?
Look, I have done recruitment for over 10 years now, and it has been a few years since I have interviewed for a role. But I remember interviewing for a role and I totally bombed, completely bombed. Like, as a recruiter, I know all the things to do, but the thing that actually got me across the line was at the end. I'm like, I'm so sorry. I did really badly in this interview, but just stopped for a minute and was just being authentic. I was probably fortunate that the interview panel were women, so they're a bit more forgiving, but just being authentic and acknowledging that, like, look, I haven't done great here. Is there any other gaps that you want me to fill that I haven't talked about or that I haven't covered? So yeah, even as a recruiter, I've messed up too. And it's okay. But basically, in terms of preparing for an interview, you want to have solid examples ready to go. When you're answering an interview question, you need to be answering in a particular way, and that's either the STAR method or the SAO method. If you're not familiar with either, I say use the SAO method because it's easier to remember. So it's situation, action, outcome. So each answer you are giving, you're talking about a specific example. You're talking about what the situation was in that example, what actions you specifically took, and what the outcome of your actions was. Was it successful? Was everyone happy? And also extending further on that in terms of what did you learn or what would you do differently if you had the chance? So when it comes to interview prep, it's thinking about any example you can come up with. So looking closely at the skills and the personal attributes that they've asked for as well. There's often questions around problem solving, collaboration, a time you've made a mistake, a time you've not got on with someone, whether it's a colleague or a client or whatever that may be. So coming up with examples based on these skills and attributes that they've asked for. And there is a big push now focusing on not just the technical skills, but that alignment with those personal attributes and the values and things. So making sure to have examples ready for those as well and know why you have applied for the role. It's usually the first question you get asked. If you get asked, tell me about yourself, I apologize. It's a terrible question. Hopefully you get asked, what was it about this role that made you want to apply, or what motivated you to apply for this role, something along those lines. And in that, you're talking about your skills and experience that align with the role, what the values of the company are, and how that aligns with you, and any sort of key initiatives and things that they have that really aligns with you as well. It's just seeing how you, or showing them how you align with the role all the way throughout.
That's really good. And anything else during an interview, is it that you should dress? Like, how about to dress? Do you shake hands? Do you not? And also, how much research should you do beforehand? So, yeah, I guess it's that preparation is key element, isn't it?
There is, yes. And to be fair, COVID made, do we handshake or do we not, really tricky. I think we are back to handshake stage, so I'd always go with that. The interview panel or the interview person should introduce themselves. So repeat their name back as you shake their hand. It will help you remember it so that you can sort of say it throughout the interview as well, and remember it at the end when you shake their hand again to say, thanks, Peter, for having me in, So just those key points of contact and connection. So eye contact, dressing for the role that you want. I did have to get past this with some of my roles where people were showing up in jeans, and I learnt that was their formal dress. That was a shock to me interviewing for horticultural roles. And I'm like, does no one have dress pants? And they're like, they would wear that to a wedding or a funeral. I'm like, what? But dressing well for the role you want is important because you don't know who's on the other side and how important that is to them. It's better to be overdressed than personal contact. We had a couple where people were touching the interviewers throughout the interview. Very strange. So just maintaining professionalism as well. I have many stories. Maintaining professionalism as well, but also remembering that the interviewer or the panel, they are just people as well. Some of the people that I have, or the hiring managers that I've supported to interview, they would be more terrified than some of the candidates that they actually interviewed. It's a really big responsibility for them. So if it's something they're not used to or they don't like doing, they won't like it either. So any way you can turn it into a natural conversation is going to be better for both of you and going to have you looking like a good candidate at the end of the interview as well. So when you get into the interview room, literally sit down and take a deep breath and just sort of, I know it's easier said than done, but relax into the environment. They should have given you a drink. So take a minute to have a sip of the water or something and just relax into the environment and just try and treat it like a conversation.
Yeah. I've also got something that when I've been doing some interviews a little while ago, when I always said to someone, would you have any questions? And then they came back with nothing. I also said to someone recently, you're interviewing the company as
Mhm.
much as they're interviewing you. So as a, working mum, you could easily ask questions around, what's your flexible work, or what's your, you know, diversity, or
Mhm.
different questions that also, well, you also want to make sure that you're a fit for the company, as well as it's, not just
Mm.
one way,
It's
is
a
it?
two-way
The
street.
two-way
That's
street.
right. Yeah, absolutely. And that's something I'm always trying to educate my recruitment clients on, is that the candidate gets to ask questions too. They get to find out if the company is a fit for them. So there's no point asking questions if you genuinely don't have any, but you should have had some. So when it gets to the end and they say, do you have any questions? And you're like, oh, look, I actually had these questions, but you answered it here, here, and here. So I think we're covered. But yes, otherwise, thinking about anything that you need to know by the time you walk out of the room to help you decide whether you would take that role if they offered it to you. It is important, however, to focus it on the role itself. So sometimes that can be a bit of reframing questions. So it's not, I've got to pick my kids up and take them to school sports, so I can't do overtime. So what does that look like? It's sort of reframing it to be, I saw there were opportunities for overtime. What does that look like in reality? So it's hard to find a balance of being your authentic self and this whole other side of you that exists, but focusing on just the role itself and how things fit into that role, asking your questions without mentioning or focusing on your family, even though they probably realize why, but it just means that they can't discriminate against you based on those things then.
Yeah, and that's really a big important part about it
Mm.
these days, isn't it? Is about the discrimination and fair
Mhm.
work, and I
That's
guess
right.
entitlements that come with it, which is, rightly so, and everyone, needs
Mm.
that as well. So yeah, keeping it tight. But do you mention your family? How much do you mention that you might be a mom or with kids, or do you just keep it professional and just about you for the moment during the interview stage, because you don't really want that discrimination or
Mm.
the mental models of, oh, she's a mom, she may not be committed. Well, really, in fact,
Mhm.
going to get a
You
really
have no
productive
idea.
employee.
That's right, yes. It is really hard. I would say for the first interview, you try and avoid mentioning it. Again, they can probably assume, especially if you've had a career break and you put that on your resume, they can probably assume, but you just sort of want to leave that at the door and just focus on how you fit into the role so that you can't give them any reason to not hire you, basically. There's a lot of things about returning to work after having kids that are outside our control. And interviewers' unconscious bias is one of those things that we can't control. And so we just have to try and avoid giving them a reason to have bias against us, basically.
Yeah. Okay. So we've gone through the process. We've found the job. We've applied for the role. We've gone for the interview. Now, I guess there's a fork in the road. We're either going to be successful or we're going to be unsuccessful. We'll address the unsuccessful component
Mhm.
first. If we are unsuccessful, how do we manage that? Do we ask for feedback, or even mentally as well, going, I thought that interview went really well. I prepared, but obviously there was another candidate they chose. I'm not
Mm.
always going to say better, but just another
Yeah,
candidate.
another. Yeah, it can be tricky depending on company policies. A lot of large companies, you struggle to even hear back, let alone get feedback. When I'm educating businesses on hiring, I'm saying that anyone they've interviewed, they need to let them know by phone and give feedback if the candidate asks for it. But that's not always the reality. So you can try and ask for feedback, but you're not always going to get it. So I think it just becomes a mindset thing. Applying for jobs is really, really draining, especially when you're getting knockback after knockback, or you're just flat out not hearing, or you go for the interview and you think it went really well and then you don't hear anything. It can be really hard. I've been there myself. My first role out of uni, I applied for over 300 jobs before I
Oh
got
my
one
goodness.
across the
Wow.
country. I had to move across the country for my first role. So that was a lot of knockback. So I totally get it, but it just becomes comes down to resilience. Again, you can't control what the company is going to do, what the interviewers are going to do. You can only control how you respond to that. So it's acknowledging that, yeah, I did a really good interview. There's nothing, I left it all on the table. There's nothing else I could have done differently. It just was the right one for me at this time. I'll pick myself up and we'll try again. Or thinking about, well, was there anywhere I stumbled or anywhere that I had a gap or anything like that that I could improve the next time? But then at the end of the day, you still have to let it go. You can't dwell on it. It's out of your control, basically, which again, I get it's really draining and it's really easy to internalize that and start to undervalue yourself because of that. So resilience is what it comes down to, unfortunately, which is a learned skill. It's not something we sort of are born with. It's a learned thing, finding ways to move past things that are outside your control.
So true, so true. My God, 300 interviews. Congratulations of getting and making that, of getting that 301st role. So then if you are successful, what are some tips as well around negotiating pay? Because I know that generally we'll be like, yes, we'll take the job and we're so grateful for it. And so I guess negotiating pay and I don't know if there might be some terms or flexible work and things like that, that I know that, as I said, sometimes we'll just go, right, I just want the job. I will accept anything. But we probably also should not always accept the first offer or try and negotiate, shouldn't we?
Yeah, sometimes. It's not always. We don't always have to negotiate if you are actually happy with it, or some places the salary is what it is because that's all they have budget for, particularly with smaller businesses, like they go in with their final offer, basically. And so sometimes it really is what it is, but it's having an understanding of what the salary would be. So if you're applying for an admin role, having a look at what the salary is for different admins, on Seek. What are they advertising in ads, and having an understanding of what that looks like. So if you are asked what your salary expectations are, you could give a range and say, like, I'm expecting 35 to 45 an hour. And then when they come in and offer you, 32 an hour, I'm like, well, that's below what I said I would be able to do. Can you put it up to, I'd be more comfortable with this. Is that something that's possible? And again, just treating it like a conversation. Often the person that's offering the role is not the one that has the budget, basically. They're just told what they can and can't do. So just treating it like a conversation again, but knowing what the industry value is and knowing yourself what you're willing to walk away from. So if they come in with a low figure and you've already done the numbers and you need $3 more an hour to be able to make ends meet, you know that that's not going to be feasible for you. Even if you do feel like the role is a fit, it still has to fit your life financially as well. So just having that knowledge before you enter those negotiations, basically.
Yeah, really good tips. So is there any other tips, strategies or advice that you've got for working mums, I guess, navigating that recruitment process and the job interviews, and to help them get their roles either just after they've returned back into work or even after an extended career break?
Really, the biggest thing is just putting yourself out there. It can be really hard to do it. We've come back from being, a waiter or waitress to this tiny human that's taken over our lives, and we sort of lost our own identity a bit. So it's hard to take that first step, but just putting yourself back out there and acknowledging yourself as an individual person, and that you're allowed to have things away from this tiny person as well. That's okay. And then figuring out what it is that you want to do and finding ways to make it happen. Basically, you are allowed to have what you want to have.
Oh, what a great advice and good way to finish on. Now, Ash, what do you do to fill your cup and for self-care?
Look, I probably am not very good at this part myself. I work a lot. So for me, it's still a bit of a work in progress. I do work from home, so that can be really isolating. And that's something I struggled with recently or, this year. And so for me, it comes down to getting out of the house and connecting. So we made sure, we make sure that we do like a monthly family day out. We have a monthly kid-free date night. And I'm also working on connecting with other working women in my community as well, people that actually understand where I'm at in life and can sort of commiserate. But it's also not a half an hour drive to catch up with people. I can go and have a coffee with someone within 10 minutes, basically. So just finding ways to connect with different people. Being that I work from home, I don't get that very often. So I've definitely found that's what reinvigorates me.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for today's chat, Ash, and giving the tools and the tips and the strategies, and I guess through that whole recruitment process. Really appreciate it. Now, how can people get in touch with you if they want to hear or know more?
Yes. So I am on Instagram as Career Pursuit HR. You will find me there for lame reels and complaining about my kids in stories. But otherwise, you can find me on LinkedIn as well or via email as well.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for today. Really appreciate it. And I know your tips around resume writing and even going for interviews and the like are going to be really useful. So thank you so much and really appreciate your time.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate you having me on.
Thank you for listening to the Working Mumma podcast. Subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast catcher. Please also feel free to contact me on any of the Working Mumma social channels. Remember, Mumma is MUMMA, or website www.workingmumma.com.au. I would appreciate you to share this podcast with friends and colleagues, especially those that are parents managing the juggle. And I would really appreciate if you had to take the time out to leave a review of the podcast. Thank you and see you next time. Have a great week.